A devastating sleet storm attacks Bainbridge Island. In the freezing rain, a police canine discovers a horrifying sight. A 7-year-old boy, tied tightly to a tree, his body nearly frozen solid. Beside him, his loyal German shepherd growls, a desperate, final defense for his little master. They are brought to the Aegis, the sterile fortress of a reclusive billionaire. But the boy is completely silent, locked away by profound trauma. Meanwhile, the man who tied him to that tree, his own stepfather, is playing the role of a perfect, grieving father. He is using the law to demand the boy be returned. Their only fragile hope, a crayon drawing and the secret diary of his deceased mother. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles, and that even the coldest, most fortified hearts are meant to become a home. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The November storm hit Bainbridge Island not as a sudden assault, but as a suffocating cold. It was a Pacific Northwest maelstrom, a churning vortex of wind and freezing rain that funneled through the Puget Sound with a force that felt personal. The wind shrieked, a high-pitched, mournful sound that turned the island's lush, evergreen forests into a dark, brittle cage. It was a night of horizontal sleet, a relentless icy static that coated every surface in a treacherous glaze. Across the churning slate-gray water, the lights of the Seattle skyline, usually a comforting, glittering promise, were a blurred, indifferent mirage. The ferries, the island's iron umbilical cord to the mainland, had been shut down for hours. Bainbridge was cut off, an isolated satellite of forested estates and quiet wealth, surrendered to the elements. Police Chief Kate Ballard felt the heavy-duty SUV shudder as another gust hit it broadside, pushing the vehicle dangerously close to the ditch. She gripped the wheel, her knuckles white. Ballard was a woman whose entire demeanor was built for this kind of night. In her mid-40s, she possessed a pragmatic competence, her sharp, discerning gray eyes missing nothing. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a severe practical bun, accentuating a face defined by high cheekbones and a jaw set with determination. This storm was escalating from a nuisance to a genuine crisis, with downed power lines and panicked calls about falling trees. Her only company was Coda, who filled the passenger seat with a quiet, grounding presence. He was a 9-year-old German shepherd, a retired canine partner whose silvering muzzle and calm, intelligent eyes belied the power still coiled in his veteran frame. His hip injury had forced him off the Seattle roster, but he remained her partner in every way that mattered. His rhythmic breathing was a ballast against the chaos rattling the truck. "Just a few more hours, old boy," Ballard murmured, her focus entirely on the hypnotic, failing rhythm of the windshield wipers. "Then we can go home and pretend this isn't happening." Coda offered a low groan in response, his gaze fixed on the swirling darkness ahead. Suddenly, his entire body went rigid, his heavy head lifted, his ears swiveled forward, and a deep, chest-rumbling bark, not his casual patrol bark, but something sharp and urgent, cut through the cabin. "What is it, Coda?" A downed line. Ballard slowed the SUV, peering into the black maw of the forest bordering a private access road. Coda barked again, a single, authoritative command. He wasn't asking, he was telling. Trusting the dog's instincts over her own strained visibility, Ballard stopped the truck, grabbed her heavy-duty flashlight, and braced herself as she opened the door. The wind tore it from her grip, slamming it against its hinges as the sleet stung her face like needles. Coda bounded out, his movement stiff from the cold but resolute, pushing past the frozen ferns and into the tree line. "Coda, heel! Wait for me, damn it!" Ballard followed the cone of her flashlight, which illuminated a scene of violent natural disorder. She found Coda 20 yards in, standing over a large, partially uprooted Douglas fir. He was sniffing intently at something huddled at its base, letting out a high-pitched, anxious whine. Then, Ballard's light found it. It wasn't a deer, it was a child. But the scene was wrong, horrifically wrong. A second German shepherd, this one younger, leaner, and shaking violently with cold and terror, was curled around the child, growling at Coda with a desperate, protective ferocity. The child, a small boy of perhaps 7, was soaked, his skin a ghastly shade of blue-white under the flashlight's harsh beam. He was terrifyingly still, and he was bound to the tree. Ballard's breath hitched, A thick, fibrous rope, dark with water and already freezing stiff, was cinched tight around the boy's small torso and knotted to the massive trunk. A second restraint, a cruel length of chain, was padlocked from his ankle to a thick, exposed root. His hands were tied behind his back. "Oh my God," Ballard whispered, her training taking over in an instant. "Coda, back! Easy," she commanded. Coda, the professional, immediately sat on his haunches, observing. She turned her focus to the other dog, Max. "Easy, boy, easy," she said, keeping her voice low and calm, her hands visible. "I'm police. I'm here to help him. Let me help." Max, seeing Coda's calm demeanor and sensing the lack of threat, whimpered, his growl dissolving as he nudged the boy's lifeless face. Ballard unclipped the multi-tool from her belt. The rope was a frozen, solid mass. It took her precious seconds to work the blade through it. The chain was brutal. She engaged the tool's bolt cutters, placed them on the link, and squeezed. The sharp snap of the metal parting was shockingly loud in the roar of the wind. The second he was free, she scooped the boy into her arms. He was terrifyingly light, his limbs rigid. He was unconscious, his breathing a shallow, almost imperceptible flutter. Max scrambled to his feet, stumbling with exhaustion, following her as she ran back to the SUV. Coda cleared the path. She threw open the back door, laying the boy on the seat and wrapping him in the emergency thermal blanket. Max, loyal to the end, jumped in right after, curling his own shivering body around the boy's, a living, desperate shield against the cold. Ballard slammed the door, jumped into the driver's seat, and cranked the heat to full blast, her mind racing. Ferries, down. Island Clinic, a small 5-bed facility, likely on a failing backup generator and completely unequipped for critical hypothermia and trauma. Seattle General. An impossible dream across an impassable body of water. The boy had minutes, not hours. There was only one option, one place on the north end of the island that was built for this. A place rumored to be entirely self-sufficient, a technological fortress built by the island's most reclusive and enigmatic resident, Elias Thorne. She hated the idea, but she hit the gas. The Aegis, BI as the estate was named, wasn't a house. It was a statement of profound distrust, a severe structure of glass, steel, and dark concrete carved into a cliffside. Inside that fortress, Elias Eli Thorne sat in an office lit only by the cold blue glow of a dozen monitors. At 42, Eli was a man encased by his own success and the cynicism it had bred. A high-profile betrayal by his first business partner years ago had been the catalyst, freezing his worldview into one of obsessive, calculated control. He was tall, with a lean, disciplined build that spoke of controlled fasts rather than exercise. His dark hair and short beard were impeccably trimmed, showing the first distinguished flecks of gray, a handsome, severe mask for a man who analyzed all human interaction as a potential threat. He was tracking the chaotic swings of the Asian stock market when a soft, intrusive chime echoed in the sterile silence. The gate. No one ever came to the gate. He tapped a screen. A high-definition video feed illuminated his desk, showing Ballard's police SUV, its emergency lights painting frantic strobing strokes of red and blue against his black steel perimeter. He unmuted the audio. "Chief Kate Ballard, Bainbridge PD. I have a critical medical emergency. A child, 7 years old, found bound and hypothermic. The ferries are down. He won't make it to the clinic. I need access, Mr. Thorne. I know you have medical-grade facilities. I need your help. Now." Eli stared. This was an invasion, a contamination of the world he had so carefully built. His first instinct was to deny her, to route her to official channels that he knew, on a night like this, didn't exist. He was about to speak when Ballard, as if sensing his refusal, opened her back door, grabbed her flashlight, and aimed the beam inside. Eli saw the small, still form wrapped in the silver blanket. He saw the pale, waxy skin of the boy's face, the ice still clinging to his hair. He saw the 2 German shepherds huddled protectively beside him. The man who loathed variables was suddenly confronted with one he couldn't compute. With a sigh of profound irritation, Elias Thorne pressed the glowing icon on his screen. The heavy thud of the magnetic locks disengaging was the only sound as the massive steel gate slid open, swallowing the police cruiser, the storm, and the entire chaotic world he had tried so hard to keep out. The great steel gate sealed shut behind Ballard's SUV with a heavy hydraulic thud, a sound of absolute finality. It cut off the howl of the storm instantly, replacing it with the eerie, tomb-like silence of Eli's climate-controlled drive. He met them at the entrance to the main house, not with a welcome, but with the impatient energy of a man whose firewall had just been breached. Eli Thorne stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and severe in a simple black cashmere sweater and dark trousers, his face a mask of controlled annoyance. The light from the foyer spilled out onto the wet pavement, illuminating the scene. A police chief, a traumatized child wrapped in a silver blanket, and two very large, very wet German shepherds. "In here," Eli said, his voice clipped and devoid of emotion. He led them not into a warm, carpeted living area, but into a vast, minimalist space that felt more like a private museum gallery than a home. The floors were polished white terrazzo, the walls were plates of sheer glass overlooking the raging sea, and the only furniture was a collection of severe, sculptural black leather chairs. The air was dry and temperature-controlled, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive, sterile cleaning solutions. The chaos of their arrival, the dripping water, the mud from the dogs, the sheer humanity of the situation, felt like a stain on his perfect white world. The second they were inside, the dynamic established itself. Max, the younger shepherd, immediately placed his exhausted body between Leo and the room's three adults, a low, warning growl rumbling in his chest. His terror was palpable, but his loyalty was absolute. He was injured himself. A raw patch on his shoulder showed where he had likely fought against his own restraint. Coda, ever the professional, simply stood at Ballard's side, observing Max with a calm, steady gaze that was neither threatening nor submissive. He was a silent signal to the other dig. "We are not the enemy." Eli's sharp eyes darted to Max. "That dog is a liability. It needs to be contained. That dog is the only reason he's alive," Ballard countered, her voice sharp as she knelt by the boy. "He stays." She didn't wait for permission. She and Eli placed Leo on a long, backless leather divan, the only object in the room that could serve as a bed. The silver thermal blanket was already losing its battle against the deep, pervasive cold. "I need towels, blankets, the warmest you have, and a first aid kit." Eli disappeared down a hallway without a word. The efficiency was impressive. He returned seconds later with a stack of thick, pristine white towels and a comprehensive medical kit that looked more suited for a trauma bay than a billionaire's bathroom. As Ballard began to peel back the sodden, filthy clothes from the boy's small frame, the room's sterile air filled with the sharp, metallic tang of blood and the sour scent of fear. And then they saw the truth. Eli, who had built an empire on data and cold logic, physically recoiled. Ballard let out a choked gasp. It was worse than she'd seen in the dark. The boy's wrists and ankles were not merely bruised. They were raw, open wounds, the flesh chafed away by the coarse rope, which had ground its way down to the bleeding subcutaneous tissue. His thin torso was a horrifying roadmap of old, yellowing bruises and fresh, violent purple contusions, one in the distinct, terrible shape of a boot. On his shoulder was an old scar, a pale, puckered circle that looked unmistakably like a cigarette burn. This was not a single act of violence. This was a lifestyle. This was torture. Eli's carefully constructed mask of irritation cracked. His face went pale, his lips thinning into a white line of profound, visceral disgust. This was not a data point. This was a fundamental breakdown of order, a savagery that offended his very core. It was in this moment of raw discovery that the boy's eyes fluttered open. There was no scream. There was no cry for help. There was only a sudden, sharp intake of breath and a terrible, paralyzing awareness. Leo's eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, darted from Ballard's concerned face to Eli's severe, disgusted one, and then fixed on the ceiling, locking into a stare of absolute, consuming terror. He was conscious, but he was not present. He had retreated to a place deep inside himself where no one could reach him. "Hey, sweetheart, you're safe now," Ballard said, her voice gentle, trying to project a warmth that the room actively repelled. "My name is Kate. We're in a warm house. You're safe." The boy's only response was to flinch, his entire body trembling violently. His small, raw hand fumbled blindly for Max, his fingers burying themselves in the dog's thick, wet fur. That was his only anchor. "Can you tell me your name?" Ballard asked softly. "Nothing." "How old are you, honey?" The silence that followed was heavier and more absolute than the storm-muffled quiet of the house. It was a void. This was not the shy reticence of a scared child. This was a deliberate, fortified wall. He was nonverbal, locked away by a trauma so profound that his own voice was a luxury his mind could not afford. "It's okay," Ballard murmured, though her expression told Eli it was anything but. She turned to her radio, trying to reach dispatch, to get CPS involved, to do anything official. The radio responded with a burst of static. The storm had severed communications. They were truly, completely isolated. Ballard stood up, turning to face the master of the house. Her uniform was dripping onto his perfect floor, but she no longer cared. "Mr. Thorne, Chief Ballard, officially, I have no communication, no access to CPS, and no way to transport a critical care hypothermia and trauma victim. I am commandeering your home as a temporary safe house and medical facility for this child." Eli stared at her, his dark eyes unreadable. This was the ultimate breach of his control. The storm, the cop, the dogs, and now this broken, silent child. All were invaders in his sanctuary. He paced the length of the room, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The logic of the situation was inescapable. He could not, in any legal or moral sense, eject them. The law was on her side, and the storm was on his doorstep. "The East Wing," he said finally, his voice flat. "There is a guest suite with its own utilities and a medical-grade filtration system. It's isolated from the rest of the house. You can take him there." He looked at the two dogs, who were now huddled together on the floor, Max's head resting on Coda's paws in a moment of shared, exhausted truce. "The animals can stay in the adjacent mudroom. It's heated." "No," a small, hoarse voice suddenly whispered, cracking the silence. Everyone froze. Leo, who had not moved, was staring at Eli, his eyes wide with a new, specific terror. "No, please." His voice was a dry, rusty rasp, as if it hadn't been used in ages. Max stays." It was a plea, but it was also a desperate, non-negotiable demand. Eli looked from the silent, terrified child to the loyal, bleeding dog. This messy, illogical, emotional chaos was everything he detested. He ran a hand through his perfect hair, his control finally fraying. "Fine," he snapped. "Fine. The dog stays with him, all of you. This way." He turned and stalked down the white corridor, a reluctant host leading a procession of the broken and the brave into the heart of his fortress. The storm had broken by morning, leaving behind a world scoured clean and unnaturally silent. The wind was gone, replaced by a cold, heavy stillness, and the sky was the color of bruised metal. Inside the guest wing of the Aegis, the silence was of a different kind. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Kate Ballard sat in a minimalist chair, her uniform wrinkled, her face etched with exhaustion. She had not slept, spending the night listening to the boys' fitful, whimpering sleep, and her own useless radio crackling with static. Leo was awake, sitting on the bed, wrapped in one of Eli's ludicrously expensive cashmere blankets. He was clean, his wounds had been disinfected and bandaged by Ballard, but his eyes were just as vacant as before. He sat like a small porcelain doll, his gaze fixed on nothing, his only movement the slow, methodical stroking of Max's head. The dog hadn't left his side, a furry, breathing bastion against the sterile white room. Elias Thorne stood in the doorway, a porcelain mug of black coffee in his hand. He hadn't slept either, but his irritation had crystallized into a cold, sharp-edged frustration. This situation was intolerable. He was a man who solved problems. He built systems, he analyzed data, he executed solutions. But this was a broken variable. The boy was a piece of damaged hardware, and no amount of logic, money, or state-of-the-art medical supplies could force him to speak. This helplessness was a foreign, acidic feeling in Eli's gut. He had provided the finest shelter, the safest environment, and the problem remained. He looked at Ballard, whose quiet, weary presence was another unwelcome intrusion. "Communications are still unstable," she reported, not needing to be asked. "I got a broken signal through to dispatch. CPS is notified, but with the roads and the ferry backlog, they said it could be 24 hours before they can get an agent out to Bainbridge. Until then, he's my responsibility, which means he's your guest." Eli's jaw tightened. 24 more hours of this. He looked at Leo, who flinched as Eli's gaze passed over him. The boy's silence was an accusation, a defiance he couldn't counter. He couldn't command him to speak. He couldn't threaten him. He couldn't fix him. He took a sip of his coffee. There was only one person he knew who dealt in this kind of illogical, messy, human damage. A person he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, not since the funeral of their mother, where their simmering resentment had finally boiled over into a cold, permanent schism. The thought of making the call was nauseating, a profound concession of failure. But the sight of the small, broken child in his sterile white room was, for reasons he refused to analyze, even more unbearable. He turned, walked to his office, and dialed the number he knew by heart. "Eris," he said when the line connected, his voice devoid of any warmth or preamble. "I need you on the first ferry from Seattle. I have a situation here, a child." 2 hours later, Dr. Eris Thorne arrived. He was, in every conceivable way, the antithesis of his older brother. Where Eli was tall, sharp, and encased in dark, expensive minimalism, Eris was of average height and softer build, radiating a disarming warmth that his worn, oatmeal-colored wool peacoat and slightly unruly brown hair only amplified. At 35, his face was kinder than Eli's, his light beard untrimmed, his hazel eyes possessing a weary but profound perceptiveness. He was the man who had taken their family's intellectual brilliance and applied it not to code, but to chaos, the chaotic, unpredictable minds of traumatized children. He stepped out of his modest hybrid car, a stark contrast to Eli's black Tesla, and looked up at the imposing fortress-like structure of the Aegis. "Elias," Eris said, his voice calm as he entered the cavernous foyer. "Eris," Eli replied, his tone flat. The air between them crackled with 3 years of unspoken anger. "You're soft, Eris," Eli had told him at the funeral, "wasting a mind like yours on feelings. It's a pathetic waste." Eris had looked at the hollow, billion-dollar shell his brother had become and replied, "And you're empty, Eli. You've built a vault with nothing inside it." Now, that vault had been breached. "The situation is in the guest wing," Eli said, all business. "A boy, 7 years old, found by police, tied to a tree in the storm. Severe trauma, physical and mental. He's nonverbal." Eris's expression tightened, the professional in him overriding the fraternal resentment. "Police? CPS? Chief Ballard is here. CPS is delayed," Eli clipped. "I need you to fix him. Get him to talk so they can process him and move him out. I don't care what it takes." Eris stopped walking and looked at his brother. "You don't fix a child, Eli. You don't process trauma. My God, even now, it's just a transaction for you, isn't it?" "Is it not?" Eli countered, his voice dangerously quiet. "I have a problem I cannot solve. You are a specialist in solving this kind of problem. I called you. That is a transaction. Now, are you going to help or not?" Eris sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Show me the boy." When Eris entered the guest suite, the atmosphere instantly changed. He didn't loom. He didn't command the space as Eli did. He first gave a respectful nod to Chief Ballard. "Chief, Eris Thorne." Then his eyes fell on Leo. He didn't approach. He didn't smile a big, false, clinical smile. He simply took in the scene, the small boy, the raw wounds on his wrists, and the 2 German shepherds. His gaze lingered on the dogs. He saw Max, pressed trembling against Leo's side, his eyes wary. He saw Coda, lying calmly by Ballard's feet, a silent, professional sentinel. Eris slowly, deliberately, sat down on the cold terrazzo floor, 10 feet away, leaning his back against the wall. He was no longer a threat. He was just part of the room. He didn't look at Leo. He looked at Max. "That's a good dog," Eris said softly, his voice a low, gentle rumble directed at the animal. Max's ear twitched. His low growl faltered, turning into an uncertain whine. "That's a very brave dog." Eris then glanced at Coda. "And he knows it. He sees you." Coda, recognizing a friend, thumped his tail once on the floor. Eris turned his attention back to Max. "My brother, Eli, he doesn't like dogs much," Eris continued, his voice conversational, as if speaking to an old friend. "He had one when we were kids, a shepherd, just like you. Eli loved that dog more than anything. When it got old and died, he just shut that part of himself off. Easier to build a wall than to feel it, I guess." Leo's head, which had been locked in a forward gaze, turned, just a fraction of an inch. His eyes moved from the wall to this new, quiet man who was sitting on the floor, talking to his dog. Ari slowly extended a hand, palm down, towards Max, not to pet, just to offer. "You did a good job protecting him," Aris whispered, his eyes on the dog. "You're a guardian. He's lucky to have you." Max, smelling no threat, only a quiet understanding, crept forward, his belly low to the ground. He nudged Aris's hand with his wet nose, once, then retreated back to Leo's side. Aris smiled, a small, genuine smile. He had been in the room for 10 minutes and had not asked the boy a single question. He had not pressured him or even made direct eye contact. He had simply validated the only thing in the world Leo trusted, his dog. Eli stood in the doorway, watching this baffling, inefficient display. It was the most useless, illogical thing he had ever seen. And yet, for the first time in 24 hours, the boy's eyes were focused. He was listening. The breakthrough Aris had achieved was not a victory, but a fragile truce. Leo had listened, but he had not spoken again since his single, desperate plea for Max. He remained a silent observer, his eyes now warily following Aris, who had managed to coax him into eating a small bowl of oatmeal, a task that had seemed impossible an hour prior. The tension in the guest wing had shifted. Eli's impatience was now competing with a grudging, baffled curiosity at his brother's methods, while Chief Ballard was focused on the next inevitable step. Her radio, finally catching a clear signal from the mainland tower, crackled to life. She had spent 10 minutes speaking in low, official tones, her notepad filling with information. She finally clicked the radio off and looked at the Thorne brothers, her face grim. "I have an identification," she said, her voice heavy. "His name is Leo Vance, 7 years old. His mother died of an overdose last year." She paused, her gaze flicking to the silent boy. "He's currently in the sole legal custody of his stepfather, a Mr. Carl Maddox, residence in Poulsbo." Eli's jaw tightened. The name felt like a piece of gravel in his mouth. "Maddox," he repeated, tasting the word. "So, we have a name for the monster." Ballard shook her head, her professionalism acting as a brake on his assumption. "We have a name for the guardian, Mr. Thorne. We don't have proof of anything else yet. I need to go to that address. I need to make a welfare check, notify him that the child has been found." "I'll go with you," Eli stated. It wasn't a request. Iris immediately stood up from the floor. "No, Eli. Your place is here. You're the civilian witness, and he's in your home. My place is here with him. I'm not asking for permission, Eris. This problem originated from outside this house. I intend to see the source of the malfunction." Ballard cut them both off. "Dr. Thorne is right. He needs to stay with the boy. But Mr. Thorne, as the owner of the property where the child was found, you have a right to be present. Frankly, I could use a second set of eyes. This feels wrong." She checked her sidearm, a purely reflexive gesture. "Let's go. Dr. Thorne, keep this line open. Do not, under any circumstances, let anyone in this house until I return." Eris simply nodded, his attention already back on Leo, who had watched the entire exchange, his small hand once again buried in Max's fur. The drive from the insulated high-tech fortress of the Aegis on Bainbridge Island to the working-class town of Poulsbo took less than 30 minutes. They crossed the Agate Pass Bridge, leaving the enclave of hidden wealth and entering a world of diners, hardware stores, and modest prefabricated homes. Poulsbo, with its charming, self-styled Little Norway waterfront, was a town of fishermen and tradesmen. Carl Maddox lived on its grimy outskirts, in a small, faded blue rental house set on a patchy lawn. A large, dented Ford pickup truck was parked haphazardly in the driveway, and a pile of discarded lumber scraps rotted near the porch. The place didn't scream poverty, but it reeked of profound neglect. Ballard, in full uniform, knocked firmly on the door. Eli stood a step behind her, his posture rigid, his dark, expensive peacoat making him look like an undertaker visiting a hovel. The door swung open, and the man who filled the frame was the physical antithesis of Elias Thorne. Carl Maddox was perhaps 40, but looked older, his body thick and powerful from manual labor. He was broad-shouldered, with a carpenter's muscled forearms, which were visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of a worn red and black flannel shirt. His hair was a sandy brown, and he had a full, slightly unkempt beard that did little to hide the weakness in his chin. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, but the smile he immediately flashed was practiced, a tool he used with lazy confidence. His eyes, a pale, assessing blue, flickered from Ballard's uniform to Eli's expensive coat. "Ma'am, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice a smooth, charming baritone. "Something I can help you with?" "Mr. Carl Maddox?" Ballard asked, her voice pure regulation. "That's me." "Sir, I'm Chief Ballard. We are here regarding your stepson, Leo Vance." The change was instantaneous, a masterclass in performance. Maddox's hand flew to his chest, his pale eyes widening with what looked like devastating relief. "Oh my God," he choked out, leaning against the doorframe. "You found him? Is he okay? Thank God. I've been worried sick. I've been combing the woods all night. I just got back." He ran a hand through his hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Where is he? Is he hurt?" "He's safe, Mr. Maddox. He was found on Bainbridge Island last night, suffering from severe hypothermia." "Bainbridge?" Maddox looked confused. "How did he get all the way over there? That boy, I swear." He shook his head, a look of profound fatherly frustration. "He's a runner, Chief. Ever since his mom passed, he's a handful. And that damn dog of his, Max, I keep telling him that dog is too wild, encourages him to run off. I was just about to call the station. I swear I was." While Maddox delivered his monologue to Ballard, Eli remained perfectly still. He hadn't said a word. His analytical gaze was not on the man's face, but on the data points. Maddox was focused entirely on Ballard, the perceived authority, and had dismissed Eli as irrelevant. This was his first mistake. Eli's eyes cataloged the scene with cold, detached precision. Data point 1. The house was cold. Through the open door, Eli could feel that the heat was off, a fact that contradicted the story of a man who had just gotten back from a frantic all-night search in a freezing storm. Data point 2. Maddox claimed he'd been combing the woods, yet his heavy work boots, visible by the door, were clean and perfectly dry. The mud and sleet that caked Ballard's boots and his own expensive leather shoes was entirely absent. Data point 3. Maddox kept gesturing with his hands to emphasize his worry. Eli's gaze locked onto the man's right forearm. Running from his wrist to his elbow were 4 deep parallel scratches, inflamed and angry, clearly made by nails or claws. "Mr. Maddox, Leo was not just found," Ballard said, her voice hardening. "He was found tied to a tree, with rope and a chain." Maddox's performance faltered for a fraction of a second. His pale blue eyes went flat and cold before he caught himself, widening them in theatrical horror. "What? Tied up? Oh my God! Some sicko must have grabbed him. I told him this area wasn't safe. My boy. Who would do that?" "We were hoping you could tell us," Ballard said. It was then that Eli spoke, his voice quiet, precise, and cutting through Maddox's feigned panic like a scalpel. "You have sawdust in your beard, Mr. Maddox, but your boots are dry." Maddox froze. His head snapped toward Eli, the mask of the grieving father vanishing. The charm evaporated, revealing the cold, hard intelligence beneath. "Who the hell are you?" Eli stepped forward, his taller, leaner frame contrasting with Maddox's brute force. "I'm the man whose property you left him on. Those scratches on your arm," Eli nodded at the man's forearm. "They look defensive, like a dog's perhaps, or a child's." Carl Maddox's face transformed. The false warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling, proprietary rage. He dropped the act entirely. He pointed a thick finger at Ballard, ignoring Eli. "I'm his legal guardian. He's my stepson. He's my property. You can't just take him. I want him back. You bring him to me right now, or I'll be talking to my lawyer about police misconduct and kidnapping." Ballard stepped between the two men. "This is an active investigation, Mr. Maddox. We've confirmed the child is safe. We will be in touch." She turned, and Eli followed. As they walked back to the SUV, Maddox stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, his pale blue eyes burning with a hatred that was potent and undisguised. The mask was off. The drive back to the Aegis was silent. Eli stared out the window at the passing trees, his mind processing the new data. The problem was no longer an abstract. It had a name, a face, and a flimsy, sawdust-covered alibi. And he, Elias Thorne, had just let the monster know exactly who he was. The drive back to the Aegis was a crucible of pressurized silence. Eli and Ballard crossed the Agate Pass Bridge, leaving the gritty reality of Poulsbo behind for the insulated fortress of Bainbridge. The SUV's interior was quiet, but Eli's mind was deafeningly loud. He was no longer just an irritated host. He was an analyst. He had identified a threat, a variable named Carl Maddox, who had just brazenly lied to a police officer and, worse, had now identified him. Maddox was a problem to be solved, and the system Ballard represented was clearly not up to the task. "He'll call CPS and his lawyer," Ballard said, finally breaking the silence as they pulled up to the gate. Her voice was flat, tired. "He'll claim parental rights. He'll file a kidnapping complaint against you, Thorne. Legally, his rights as guardian are concrete. My hands are bound until I have definitive, admissible proof that he, specifically, was the one who tied that boy to the tree. Right now, all we have is a child found on your property, and a grieving stepfather claiming some sicko attacked him." "The system is the protocol of failure that allowed this to happen," Eli retorted, his voice a low, cold vibration. He unbuckled his seatbelt before the vehicle had even fully stopped. The scratches on his arm, the dry boots, the cold house, he was lying. We both know it. Knowing it and proving it in court are two different universes, Ballard said, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "I'll file my report. I'll flag it as high priority, but he will make a move, and soon. We're on the clock." Eli looked at her, his eyes like chips of dark ice. "You do what you must, Chief. I will do what is necessary." He exited the SUV and went straight to his office, the one room in the house that was his true sanctuary. It was not a place of comfort, but of absolute control. He closed the soundproof door, sealing himself in. He didn't call a detective. He called his corporate security division. The line was answered on the first ring. "Reese," he said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I have a priority 1 data mining task. A man named Carl Maddox, resident of Poolsbo. A stepson, Leo Vance, 7. I want everything, credit history, financial statements. I want to know if he's cashing the boy's social security or survivor benefits. I want every 911 call, every disturbance complaint, every CPS filing associated with his address for the last 2 years. And I want the name of the boy's current teacher at Poolsbo Elementary. I want it 15 minutes ago." He hung up. This was his battlefield. Data. He walked from the cold precision of his office toward the guest wing, the containment zone for his new problem. The contrast was jarring. As he approached, he heard nothing. No crying, no talking. He paused at the open doorway, observing. The scene was not what he expected. Aris, his infuriatingly patient brother, was seated on the floor, back against the wall, engrossed in a paperback book. Coda, the veteran, was asleep near Ballard, who was now sitting at the room's small desk, writing her report. And Max, the loyal protector, was also asleep, his body curled in a tight comma at the foot of the bed. But Leo was not on the bed. He was at a small white table in the corner, a pad of paper and a box of crayons, which Aris must have sourced from somewhere, spread out before him. The boy was drawing, his small hand gripping a black crayon with an intensity that was almost violent. He wasn't drawing a house or a sun. He was scribbling dark, chaotic lines that filled the page, a storm of pure, silent rage. Eli watched for a long, analytical moment. Aris's illogical method was, it seemed, yielding a result. The boy was communicating. Eli's phone vibrated, a single silent buzz. He stepped back into the hall. It was a text from Reese. Subject, Maddox K Primary School, Poolsbo Elementary. Teacher, Ms. June Albright, Grade 2. Cross-ref, CPS. 3 anonymous reports of concern filed from the school's IP address in the last 6 months. All closed, dismissed as unsubstantiated after guardian, Maddox, intervened, claiming teacher harassment. Albright is at the school now, after-school program. Bingo. Eli pocketed the phone. "Chief," he called out, his voice sharp. Ballard looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "I'm going out. A personal errand." "An errand? Thorne, this is an active investigation. You're a material witness." "Which is why I'm not interfering," Eli said, his voice smooth. "I'm a concerned citizen, exploring philanthropic opportunities at the local elementary school. You, however, should remain here, to guard the victim and plausible deniability, in case your suspect gets agitated." He didn't wait for her reply. He was already moving. Poulsbo Elementary School was a low, brick building that smelled of floor wax, crayons, and cafeteria tater tots. It was a world of primary colors, laminated posters, and cheerful, chaotic noise, a world so alien to Eli that it made his skin crawl. He walked down the hallway, his severe, expensive black coat and silent, purposeful stride parting the sea of small children like a shark moving through a school of fish. He found classroom 12B. The door was open. Inside, a woman was patiently wiping down a small table covered in glitter and glue. This had to be her. Ms. June Albright was a woman in her late 50s, on the weary side of a long career. Her graying blonde hair was pulled back in a simple, frazzled clip, and her kind hazel eyes were magnified by large, round glasses. Lines of profound frustration and worry were etched around her mouth. She wore a faded denim dress adorned with pictures of planets and a pair of worn-out, brightly colored sneakers. She was the very picture of a dedicated teacher who had seen too much and been heard too little. She looked up as Eli's tall shadow fell across her doorway, her smile faltering at the sight of this severe, imposing stranger. "Can I help?" "You?" she asked, her voice raspy from a long day of teaching. "Are you looking for the office?" "Ms. Albright," Eli said, his voice low, skipping all preamble. "My name is Elias Thorne. I'm here to talk to you about Leo Vance." The reaction was instant and visceral. The woman didn't gasp, she deflated. The plastic cup of dirty paint water slipped from her hand, spilling brown liquid across the floor. She didn't seem to notice. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a choked, angry sob escaped her. "Oh, God," she whispered, her eyes flooding with tears of pure, unadulterated frustration. Did Carl? I knew it. I told them, and they wouldn't listen." She gripped at the back of a small, child-sized chair, her knuckles white. "They told me I was over-involved. They told me to stop filing reports." "He is safe," Eli said, the words sharp, cutting through her panic. "He is at my home. He is alive. But the man who hurt him is trying to get him back, and the law, Ms. Albright, is currently on his side. You said you told them. What did you tell them?" June Albright's entire demeanor changed. The weary resignation vanished, replaced by a sudden, fierce resolve. She looked past Eli into the hall, then quickly shut her classroom door, a new, conspiratorial energy about her. "They told me to destroy my notes. The official reports are sealed," she said, her voice dropping to a furious whisper. She walked to a large, colorfully painted metal filing cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer with a key from around her neck, and pulled out a worn, purple accordion file labeled Private. "I didn't destroy anything," she said. "I'm a teacher. We don't destroy a child's work." She opened the file on her desk. It was full of her own typed, dated observations. Nav 2. Leo arrived with a bruise on his cheek. Maddox said he fell off his bike. Leo wouldn't look at me. Nav 5. Leo flinched when I raised my voice at another student, hid under the reading table for an hour. But then she pulled out a separate, thinner folder. "But these are the things that matter, the things they didn't want to see, his drawings. I have art therapy sessions every Friday." She laid 3 laminated sheets of paper on the desk. Eli stared at them. They were crude, childish crayon drawings. The first showed a small stick figure, labeled Me, standing next to a very large, angry stick figure with a red, screaming mouth, labeled Carl. The second showed the small ME figure, locked inside a black, scribbled box. But it was the third drawing that made Eli's blood run cold. It was almost identical to the chaotic scrawl he had seen Leo drawing just an hour ago. It was a dark, stormy background. A small stick figure labeled Me was on the ground, next to a large brown shape labeled Max. And over them stood the giant, red-mouthed figure of Carl, holding a black line, a rope. Eli picked up the drawing, his analytical mind seeing not a child's art, but an affidavit. Signed confession. "Ms. Albright," Eli said, his voice quiet, "I am not a police officer, but I am the man who is currently protecting that boy. I need this. I need you to tell this story to someone who can't ignore it." June Albright looked at the severe, wealthy man who looked so out of place in her classroom. She saw the same cold, analytical focus she had seen in her own mirror. He wasn't just another bureaucrat. He was angry. "They won't listen to me," she said, her voice breaking. "They will. Eli replied, tapping the drawing. Because you're not going to be talking to them. You're going to be talking to me. Eli Thorne drove back to the Aegis with a cold, clear sense of purpose. He held the laminated drawings from Ms. Albright in his hand, a tangible affidavit of the boy's suffering, a data set of trauma that not even the most willfully ignorant bureaucrat could ignore. He felt the familiar, invigorating hum of control returning. He had a target, he had leverage, and he had a plan. He was Elias Thorne. He solved complex problems. This, he thought, was now a simple one. He was wrong. As he pulled through the gates of his estate, a second vehicle was already there, parked directly in front of his main entrance, blocking his access. It was a dark blue, mud-splattered Ford sedan with a government-issue exempt license plate. Chief Ballard met him on the walkway, her arms crossed, her face a mask of grim frustration. "He's fast, I'll give him that," she said, her voice low. Maddox called his lawyer, who called the regional CPS office. "He's filed a formal complaint for custodial interference. Against you, specifically. That man inside," she nodded toward the house, "is his caseworker." Eli's newfound sense of control evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar rage. This was the part he hated, the part he had built to the Aegis to escape, the messy, flawed, and terminally stupid human systems that always failed. He stalked into his own foyer, where Aris was standing uncomfortably, and found the intruder waiting. The man was in his mid-50s, with a weary, defeated posture that seemed molded into his spine. He was dressed in an ill-fitting polyester blend suit the color of stale coffee, and he held a worn, bulging clipboard to his chest like a shield. This was Mr. Davies, a senior field agent for Child Protective Services, and his eyes, magnified by thick, smudged glasses, held the profound, bone-deep cynicism of a man who had waded through the wreckage of families for 30 years and no longer expected to find survivors. He looked at Eli, a billionaire in his own fortress, with a visible, weary disdain. "Mr. Thorne, I'm Ron Davies. I have a court order, signed an hour ago by Judge Miller, to take custody of Leo Vance and return him to his legal guardian, Mr. Carl Maddox." "You will do no such thing," Eli stated, his voice dropping to a near-zero-degree calm. "Sir, I understand you think you're helping," Davies sighed, the sound of a man reciting a script he despised. "But you are not a guardian. You are not a foster parent. You are a civilian who is currently in violation of a custodial order. Mr. Maddox is waiting at the Poolsbo Police Precinct. My order is to retrieve the boy and facilitate the reunification." "Reunification? With this?" Eli thrust the drawings from Ms. Albright onto the marble console table. "This is a signed confession, drawn by the victim. Look at it." Davies, to his credit, picked up the laminated sheets. He studied them for a long, silent moment. He looked at the screaming red mouth of Carl, the black box, and the final, damning image of the boy tied next to his dog. He then placed them back on the table. "They're drawings, Mr. Thorne. They're art. They're heartbreaking. But they are not admissible proof that Mr. Maddox, a man with no prior convictions, committed a crime. What they are," he said, tapping the clipboard, "is evidence that the child is in a high-stress environment, and that his teacher, Ms. Albright, has been violating a previous CPS directive to cease contact." He looked at Ballard. "Chief, I'd have expected better. You know the protocol." "I know a victim when I see one, Ron," Ballard said, her voice tight with anger. "And I know a lawsuit when I see one," Davies retorted. "Maddox's lawyer is claiming you're all conspiring, using his wealth," he nodded at Eli, "to purchase a child. It's a legal minefield, and I am not stepping in it. The boy's guardian has rights." "The boy has rights," Eris suddenly cut in, his voice passionate, a stark contrast to the cold procedural back and forth. "He is selectively mute due to profound psychological trauma. Moving him, returning him to the source of that trauma, could cause irreparable damage." Davies turned his weary eyes on Eris. "And who are you, his doctor?" "I am Dr. Eris Thorne. I'm a child psychologist, and yes, I am treating him." "Are you his court-appointed psychologist, Dr. Thorne, or are you the brother of the man who is illegally holding him?" Davies didn't wait for an answer. He looked at Eli. "This is over. I'm taking the boy." "No," Eli said. He walked to his main console, his fingers flying over a screen. "My legal team is already filing an emergency injunction. I'm suing your department for negligence, and I am naming Maddox in a civil suit. You can wait here, or you can wait at your office. But you are not taking that child until a judge sees these drawings." The standoff was absolute. Davies, a low-level bureaucrat, was now staring down a billionaire with an infinite legal budget and a very angry police chief. He was outgunned, and he knew it. He sighed, rubbing his temples. 9 a.m., he said. "The injunction won't be seen until court opens. I'll give you until 9 a.m. tomorrow. I have to make my report. But at 9 a.m., I'm coming back with the sheriff, and we will take him. Have him ready." He turned, his shoulders slumped, and walked out into the cold daylight. The cat had set the trap, and the mouse had just hours to escape. While the confrontation raged in the foyer, Aries had retreated. He knew that the loud, angry voices of the adults, the system, were poison to Leo. He led the boy and the two dogs into a small, glassed-in atrium that faced the sea, a pocket of quiet warmth filled with Eli's austere, exotic plants. He sat on the floor, watching Leo. The boy was trembling, his visit with Ms. Albright's drawings forgotten, his mind once again retreating to that silent, locked room. He was rocking, a low, terrified keen coming from his throat as he clutched Max. Coda, the old professional, whined in sympathy, nudging Leo's hand. Aris knew he had to re-anchor him. He had to bring him back from the panic. "You see Coda, Leo?" he said softly, ignoring the tension from the other room. "He's worried about you. He's a police dog. He knows when people are sad." Leo's rocking slowed. He looked at Coda. Aris then looked at Max, who was licking the boy's face, his body language pure, protective anxiety. Aris had been observing Max for hours. The dog's behavior was not just loyal, it was precise. The way he cleared the room, the way he sat at Leo's heel, the way he watched every entrance. It was trained. "Max is a very special dog, isn't he?" Aris continued, his voice a low, soothing hum. "He's not just a pet. He's a soldier." Aris had spent 20 minutes on the phone with a friend at a veterinary registry while Eli was gone. "I know his secret, Leo. His name isn't just Max, is it? His real name is Titan. He was a K9, just like Coda. He worked for the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office before he came to live with you." Leo, who had been rocking and staring into nothing, went perfectly still. His head snapped up. His wide, terrified eyes locked on Aris. "He was a hero," Aris said, pressing the advantage, his voice filled with the respect he truly felt. "He was trained to protect his partner. His partner was his whole world, and then he came to live with you, and you became his partner." Aris looked at the boy, his gaze steady and profound. "He protected you, Leo. That's what partners do. That's what soldiers do. They protect their team. You and him, you're a team, aren't you?" This finally was the key. Aris had reframed the narrative. Leo was not just a victim. He was a partner. He was part of a team, with a hero. The shame that had silenced him was momentarily eclipsed by this new identity. He looked at Max, his partner. He looked at Coda, another soldier. He looked at Ballard's uniform, visible through the glass door. A connection was made. He was in a house full of protectors. "What did he protect you from, Leo?" Aris asked gently. "What did you two fight against? Where did the monster put you?" Leo's breathing was ragged. His small hand, the one with the raw, bandaged wrist, reached for the pad of paper and the black crayon. Eli and Ballard, the confrontation over, now stood in the doorway, watching, holding their breath. Leo's hand trembled so violently he could barely hold the crayon. He wasn't scribbling now, he was writing. He pressed the crayon to the paper with a desperate, singular focus, his entire body shaking. The wax tip snapped under the pressure, but not before he had scrawled one jagged, blocky word: Cellar. The single word lay on the paper, a jagged, desperate accusation in black crayon. Cellar. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than the storm, heavier than the 9 a.m. deadline that now felt like a ticking bomb. Eli, Ballard, and Arise stared at the word. It was not a drawing. It was not a scribble. It was testimony. It was the key. Kate Ballard was the first to move, her exhaustion vanishing, replaced by a sudden, cold surge of adrenaline. She knelt in front of Leo, her voice low and steady, not as a cop, but as a witness. "The cellar, Leo? He put you in the cellar?" Leo's whole body was a single, shuddering tremor. He didn't look at her, but he gave one sharp, jerky nod. His eyes were screwed shut, as if saying the word had cost him everything. "That's it," Ballard said, standing, her radio already in her hand. "That specific probable cause. He's not just a runner, he's a prisoner." Eli looked at the clock on the wall. 10:17 p.m. "Davies is coming back at 9 a.m., he said, his voice flat. "He's coming with a court order and a sheriff. He will not find Leo here. We have less than 11 hours to make this go away." "I'm not making it go away, Thorne," Ballard snapped, her focus absolute. "I'm making an arrest." She was already dialing. "I'm calling Judge Miller. He's the night duty judge. He knows I don't call at 10 p.m. on a Sunday unless the world is on fire. This," she pointed to the drawing, "corroborated by this." She pointed to the laminated drawings from Ms. Albright, and backed by my own observation of the victim's physical state, is enough for an emergency telephonic warrant. I'm not waiting. "Good," Eli said. He walked to the hall closet and retrieved his own severe dark wool coat. "You're driving. I'm navigating." "Whoa," Eris said, standing up, finally breaking his therapeutic calm. "Eli, you can't. You're a civilian. This is a police raid. You'll contaminate the entire case." "He's right," Ballard agreed, her phone to her ear. "You're a material witness, Thorne. You stay here, lock the doors, protect the boy." "Protect the boy?" Eli's voice was dangerously quiet as he buttoned his coat. "That man knows my face. He knows my house. He knows I have the child. He is a cornered, violent animal who has already proven he's capable of anything. He has until 9 a.m. to make his problem, me, go away. This is no longer just a police matter. This is a security matter. I am not letting you go to that house alone, Chief. I am the second witness, and frankly, he'll be looking for you. He won't be looking for me." Ballard looked at him, seeing the cold, unshakable logic. She hated it, but he was right. She finally got the judge's clerk. "This is Chief Ballard, Bainbridge PD," she said, her voice all business. "I need an emergency warrant, now." The drive back to Poolsbo was a high-speed slice through the cold, dark night. The streets were empty. Ballard drove, her jaw set, while Eli sat in the passenger seat, his phone glowing as he monitored his own home's security feed. Eris, Coda, Max, and Leo, all safely in the atrium. Ballard, meanwhile, was on the phone with Judge Miller, laying out the facts with brutal efficiency. "Yes, Your Honor, tied to a tree, ligature marks consistent with torture. New testimony from the victim indicates imprisonment in a cellar. Corroborating drawings from his teacher. Yes, the father is a flight risk and has already threatened legal action. Requesting a full search warrant for the premises at..." She gave the address. A pause. "Thank you, Your Honor. Warrant is granted. E-signature on its way." She hung up. "We're legal." They didn't pull up to the faded blue house with lights flashing. Ballard killed her lights a block away and coasted to a stop. Maddox's dented pickup truck was in the driveway. The house was completely dark. "He's asleep," Ballard whispered, drawing her service weapon. "He thinks he has until morning. He thinks he won." "No," Eli said, getting out of the car. "He's an animal. He's celebrating." Ballard moved to the front door, Eli flanking her, staying in the shadows. She didn't knock. She raised her boot and kicked the door just beside the knob. The cheap wood frame splintered with a sound like a gunshot, and the door flew open. "Police! Warrant! Show me your hands!" The stench of stale beer and unwashed clothes hit them instantly. In the darkness, they heard a crash, then footsteps. Carl Maddox appeared in the hallway, not in sleeping clothes, but in the same jeans and flannel shirt he'd been wearing that afternoon. He was holding a half-empty bottle of whiskey. His eyes were wide, not with sleep, but with pure, unadulterated rage. "You!" he screamed, his eyes locking on Ballard. "You can't do this. I'll have your badge. I'll have your job. Get out of my house." "On the ground, Maddox, now," Ballard commanded, her flashlight beam pinning him like a terrified animal. "You're harassing me. You're in with that billionaire freak," Maddox roared, and he did something unbelievably stupid. He threw the whiskey bottle. Ballard ducked as it shattered against the wall behind her. That was all the provocation she needed. She lunged, tackling him at the waist. But Maddox was strong, his body fueled by manual labor and adrenaline. He fought back, shoving her off him, scrambling to get to his feet. Eli, who had never been in a physical fight in his entire insulated life, reacted not with passion, but with physics. As Maddox tried to regain his footing on the linoleum floor, Eli simply stepped forward and kicked the back of the man's knee. The joint buckled instantly. Maddox roared as his leg collapsed, and he pitched forward, his face slamming into the kitchen floor with a sickening crack. Before he could move, Ballard was on his back, her knee driving into his spine, the cold steel of her handcuffs snapping shut on his wrists. "You're under arrest, Carl, for assault on a police officer for a start." Maddox spat a string of curses onto his own floor. "You've got nothing, nothing. The kid's a liar." "Let's find out," Ballard said, getting to her feet, her breath ragged. She left the cuffed Maddox face down on the floor, where Eli silently, watchfully stood over him. "The cellar," Ballard said. She looked around the kitchen. There, under a stained, cheap vinyl rug, there was a small, square cutout in the floor with a ring pull. She pulled it open. The smell that rose from the darkness was overwhelming, a humid, toxic stench of ammonia, feces, and damp, rotting earth. It was the smell of a cage. Ballard shone her high-powered flashlight into the darkness. "Oh my God," she whispered. Eli moved beside her, his flashlight joining hers. The beam illuminated a small, dirt-floor hole, perhaps 6 feet square. In the corner sat a massive, industrial-sized dog crate. The metal bars were rusted. The floor of the crate was nothing but a pile of filthy, sodden rags, and a small, plastic food bowl was kicked into the corner, green with mold. Hanging on a nail driven into the damp earth wall, just outside the crate, was a coiled length of coarse rope, identical to the one Ballard had cut off Leo's body. And on the floor, next to the crate, was a heavy chain, bolted to a concrete anchor, with a small open padlock on the end. It was a dungeon. It was the black box from the drawings. "It's all here, Carl," Ballard said, her voice shaking with a cold fury. "He didn't just run away. You kept him in a hole. You kept both of them in a hole." The deep, desperate claw marks on the wooden stairs leading out of the cellar were proof. That was Max. "You can't prove it," Maddox screamed from the floor. "He's a freak. His mother was a junkie. You can't prove a damn thing." "I think this proves it," Eli said, his voice quiet. His light had not been on the cage. It had been on a small, dusty shelf near the cellar stairs. Tucked behind some jars of nails was a small, pink, glitter-covered notebook, a diary. He didn't touch it. "Chief, bag it." Ballard, pulling on a pair of latex gloves, carefully picked up the diary. She opened it. The handwriting inside was a loopy, feminine script. It was Leo's mother's. The last few entries were frantic, dated just over a year ago before her overdose. Octi 14. Carl is drinking again. He locked Leo in the cellar because he spilled his milk. Max tried to stop him, and Carl kicked him. "I'm so scared." Octi 16. He said if I ever tell anyone, he'll kill Max and make Leo watch. He said he'll tell everyone I'm just a crazy junkie and they'll take Leo away anyway. Okit 17. I have to get out. I have to run. I packed a bag. Max and Leo. We have to. It was the last entry. Ballard snapped the book shut, her face pale. She looked at Maddox, who had finally, mercifully gone silent. She read him his rights, her voice ringing with grim finality in the cold, filthy house. The clock was no longer ticking. 1 year, 12 months. A full cycle of seasons had passed over Bainbridge Island, washing away the memory of the ice storm, turning the trauma of that night into a scar that was no longer an open wound, but a healed silver line that marked a definitive before and after. The Aegis, Elias Thorne's sterile, minimalist fortress of solitude, was unrecognizable. It was no longer a tomb of white terrazzo and silent tinted glass. It was a home. The heavy silence had been permanently breached, replaced by a vibrant, chaotic symphony of life. The percussive thwack of a rubber ball hitting the outside wall, the distant, joyful shouting of a boy, and the constant clicking claws of 2 very large, very happy German shepherds skittering across floors they were technically not allowed on. Eli Thorne stood on the terrace, a porcelain mug of black coffee in his hand. His morning ritual was the same, but his view had changed. He was no longer analyzing the cold data of the Asian stock market. He was watching his son. Leo Thorne, now 8 years old, was a different creature entirely. The haunted, silent porcelain doll of a boy was gone, replaced by a vibrant, healthy child, his limbs lean and strong, his face flushed with the energy of a summer morning. He was currently trying, and spectacularly failing, to teach both Max and Coda how to play fetch with two different balls. "No, Coda, that's Max's. Max, you have to drop yours first." "Ugh, you guys are the worst team." Leo's voice, once a dry, rusty whisper of terror, was now clear, bright, and commanding. The dogs, of course, paid him no mind, simply seeing the game as a glorious opportunity for chaos, with Coda, the disciplined veteran, looking almost embarrassed by the sheer puppy-like joy of his younger companion, Max. The transformation had been the singular focus of the past year. It had taken months of slow, agonizingly patient work from Aries. The boy's demands had been a fortress of its own, and Eris had been the diplomat at the gate, never forcing, always waiting. He had used the dogs as his bridge, then art, then simple, shared silence, until one day Leo had looked up from a drawing of a boat and asked, "Is Seattle on the other side of the water?" From that first hesitant question, the dam had broken. The words had tumbled out, followed by the nightmares, the anger, and finally, the healing. The legal battle had been, in contrast, brutally swift. The 9 a.m. deadline that had felt like an executioner's clock had evaporated. Mr. Davies, the weary CPS agent, had arrived at the Aegis not with a sheriff, but with a look of pale, shaken horror. Chief Ballard had personally walked him through the cellar, shown him the diary, and played him a recording of Maddox's drunken, violent confession from the back of her patrol car. The system had capitulated instantly. Eli's legal team, a force of nature normally reserved for hostile corporate takeovers, had descended upon the Kitsap County court system. Faced with the diary, the teacher's testimony, the physical evidence from the cellar, and the separate looming homicide investigation into his wife's overdose, Carl Maddox had accepted a plea deal that would bury him in a state penitentiary for the next 30 years. The adoption, fast-tracked by a judge who had read the diary, had been finalized 6 months ago. Aris stepped out onto the terrace, holding his own mug of coffee, the steam fogging his glasses. The cold 3-year schism between the brothers had thawed, melted away by the shared purpose of saving Leo. "You're going to make him late for the launch," Aris said, smiling as he watched his nephew. "He's too excited to care about time." Eli grunted, a sound that was, for him, a sign of deep contentment. "He's still a boy. 5 more minutes. Are you sure about the name?" Iris's smile widened. "It's perfect. The Albright system. It's already making waves." "It's clunky," Eli muttered. "It's a secure intake portal for high-risk, multi-source abuse reporting." "It's revolutionary, Eli," Iris said, his voice serious. "You didn't just write a check to a charity. You analyzed the failure that almost killed Leo, and you fixed it. You built a weapon, a tool that bypasses the bureaucratic incompetence that let Ms. Albright scream into the void. You've given every teacher, doctor, and counselor in the state a digital panic button that goes directly to a team of our lawyers, not a filing cabinet. It's the most you thing I've ever seen." Eli had done what he always did. He had found a flaw in the system and built a better one, and an encrypted, anonymous network that forced accountability. The foundation that funded it was named in honor of the teacher who had saved her notes, refusing to be silenced. "Dad!" Leo's voice cut through the air. He ran up, his face bright with sweat and excitement, Max and Coda flanking him, their tails wagging in perfect canine unison. "It's time! We're going to be late! Ms. Albright is meeting us there. Are you coming to the presentation?" Eli looked down at the small, strong hand that was now tugging at his. He looked at Aries, who was watching them, with a quiet, profound pride. He looked at the 2 massive German shepherds, a perfect, loyal guard, who now looked to him as their secondary alpha. He had built the Aegis as a shield to protect himself from the messy, painful, illogical chaos of the world. He had built it to keep humanity out. He had failed, spectacularly, and in that failure, he had found the one thing he didn't even know he was missing. "I'm coming," Eli said, setting his empty mug on the terrace table. He put his arm around Leo's shoulders, and the boy leaned into his side without hesitation. The 4 of them, Eli, Eris, Leo, and the 2 dogs, stood for a moment, a strange, cobbled-together, and utterly perfect family, looking out across the Sound. The Seattle skyline glittered in the bright morning sun, no longer a distant, cold constellation, but simply the view. The Aegis was still a fortress. It was still a shield, but its purpose had been redefined. It was no longer protecting him from the world. It was protecting his world. "All right," Eli said, his voice full of a warmth he hadn't known he possessed. "Let's go." A miracle isn't always a loud event. Sometimes, a miracle is the right bark at the right time, like Coda's, the unshakable loyalty of a friend, like Max's, or a cold heart, like Eli's, learning to open at the right moment. God always places quiet guardians in our lives. Sometimes they have 4 legs, sometimes they are strangers. In your own life, never underestimate the power of speaking up. You might be the only miracle someone is praying for. If this story touched your heart, please share it. Comment below and let us know how it made you feel. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story of hope. May God bless all of you.